also for the Newport Beach Film Festival for having us. This is very exciting for us. It's actually the first time I've actually sat down and watched the whole thing throughout without doing private screenings where I'm actually managing the projector and doing the aerial.
Turning lights on.
Yeah, but I guess probably you might be curious to know just how we originally started, how we met, and why Sonny started the film and I stepped on it, actually.
Yeah, well, so I went to big muckety-muck film school, and I needed to make a documentary film in order to accept some prize money. It was contingent for another film I had made. And so I was scrambling for an idea, otherwise this deadline was going to pass, and someone said, oh, I have an art teacher named Frank Mason, you got to meet him. I said, oh, okay, that's good, because I have a background in painting, and I thought, oh, that'd be great. So I remember going down to Little Italy in New York, it's below Houston, if you know New York, it's Soho, and Little Italy down there, and I remember going to this old building and opening this door and seeing this long staircase. He lives on the fifth floor of this walk-up, so I think that's what kept him alive a long time, because he would do this this walk up and down all the time for like 60 years, you know. And I remember going, wow, where am I? I feel like I just walked into this old walls and no plaster, brick exposed, and old staircase. It used to be the building for the New York Police Department used to have its machine shops in there. And so I remember going up the staircase, and I began to hear this classical music, piano music, being, you know, faint at the beginning of the climb, and then getting louder and louder and louder. And then suddenly I walked into this studio, and there's a full cast replica of the Winged Victory, and a full cast replica of the Venus de Milo, and this man with all legs and arms just going away at the piano. And then he stopped, and hello, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I was just overwhelmed by this guy. And there's beautiful paintings everywhere, and there's potbelly stove and paintings on the walls, and books, ancient books, and Persian carpets, and 17-foot-high ceilings. And you looked around, and you couldn't tell if you were in the 20th century anymore. It felt like I was 19th century probably. And it was that minute I looked at my friend. I said, "We're making a movie about this guy." And that was it. So. And then the other funny thing is, many of you may have heard from other filmmakers, or if you're filmmakers yourself, I thought it was going to be a little 6-month character study, and it turned out to be a much longer, several years, because after we got interviewing him, I realized what a brilliant, wonderful life he had led, and all the fantastic friends that he knew, and all his in and outs. There's a whole another 3 films that we could cut from the other interviews about his other travails and exploits. But early on in the beginning, we had shot about maybe about 6 hours of footage, interviews, and then we needed to start documenting all of his paintings. So we were in there, and I realized that there was this great guy always helping us out, unlocking the doors and showing us where things were. And it turned out to be his great nephew, Scott Mason. And we hit it off right away, and when I told him that I wanted to expand the project into a much larger film, I said I needed a producer that could handle the load, and so Scott came aboard, and we've been best friends ever since. And
well, a little funny episode about that is the day that I met Sonny, and we went out to lunch and really kind of hit it off. I was framing for a show that I was doing, because I originally went to New York to study art under my great uncle, and I grew up around his paintings. So, of course, I was endlessly fascinated about documenting this through film. And of course, they were shooting, and I was going about my business, and the lights shut off, and it was just, you know, it was still late in the afternoon, so we had natural light to work from and photograph from. And we went down to the bottom of Cafe Roma, and Josie, one of the baristas in Cafe Roma, came out. We were wondering what was going on. The traffic light was out, and cars were honking. And Josie came up to us and said, "Oh, you boys don't know what's going on?" He goes, "It's the blackout all over New England." So that was, if anyone recalls, back in the day, that was the 2 or 3 day blackout of all of New England. And so if we ever do any memoirs or a book on this, I'm going to call it the 8-year blackout, because from that point forward when we came onto the project. It was just a whirlwind, and of course, any filmmaker will tell you that it's a huge challenge, not only to raise the funds, but to have the connections and to be able to, to film all over Europe, and it really was a long, long process and rewarding in the end.
People really wanted to be a part of the film after we contacted them, but it was a lot of scheduling and just waiting for when they were available and when we could get there. And so a few months would go by between interviews and things like that. But we were determined to get it done, and we would cut footage together, and we would just look at the rough cuts of what we'd had, and we just loved all the footage, and we were meeting such great people throughout the whole process, and so it just really inspired us to keep going. And then there's always Frank and Ann Mason in the background, always encouraging us. And Frank, we're sorry it's taking so long. He says, masterpieces take a long time. So,
and I got a master's education from an Ivy League school through the 8 years that we've been working, and you got a fine art education. So
I really feel like I'm a PhD in art history.
But anyhow, I just want to mention before I open it up to question and answer. First of all, if you have any curiosities or want to learn more about both Frank's work, you can go on the website that has 350 of his works. It's frankmason.net, or .org, sorry. Or you can go to our film website, which is maestrofilms.net, and that will connect you through as well. And also, if you want to learn more about the art restoration controversies that we talk about, you can go to Art Watch UK. They have constant updates on things that are being restored, and it's something that kind of was late in the game when we were filming, and I knew about it and had been kind of an advocate of Art Watch, and Sonny kind of came on late in the scene, but we realized that there really hasn't been any discussion or public forum about what goes on in our museums and institutions, that sometimes are great restorations and sometimes are disastrous, but everything in the major media is congratulated and looked at as the best thing that can be done for art, and sometimes that's not the case. So why don't we go ahead and open it up? Anybody have any questions? Oh yeah, and actually, so Joseph and Serena Wendt are here, or they were here earlier, and they have the Wendt Gallery, which is down in Laguna Beach. And if you want to see about 15 of Frank's landscape paintings, you can go down there June 30th. I think the show will be up until. And so this just is a great fortunate thing for us, because we can not only show the film and get all you people excited about it, but we can also invite you to see the paintings in the flesh, so to speak. So Laguna Beach Wendt Gallery, and you can also find that on our website. It was very hard for anyone to come up and say, I'm going to take over Frank's class. So Tom Torak is teaching the same class in the same slot, and he studied with Frank for over 10 years. And he's technically and also educationally geared towards the challenge. But we hope that there's a number of students and protégés that came from Frank's class over the years that have been studying various workshops in Nashville, Tennessee, and David Ruffell is kind of a regional artist who comes and does workshops here. So there is a whole 3 generations of artists, of which probably 10% have gone on to then educate people themselves. And one story I'll just tell very quickly is when Frank was in Dumont's class, he very early on spoke to Dumont, about the techniques that he was picking up and how much he was learning. And Dumont turned to him and said, Frank, someday will you consider teaching and carrying on the tradition and techniques that I'm passing along to you? And he kind of chuckled a little bit and said to himself, he said, no, not me. I'm going to be an artist. I don't want to be an instructor for 50 years. And Dumont turned to him and he said, so young man, you think it all belongs to you, do you? And so I think that sunk in, and eventually he did take over Dumont's class. So we're fortunate that he did. Well, it's a kind of like Sonny said, it's 3 documentaries in one. And I guess it could be looked at as criticism or a new way of doing a biopic. But the best way I kind of reply to that when someone says, there's this interval of the Sistine Chapel, which we clearly bookends with quotes, so you know that we're kind of taking you outside of that and showing you a very specific case of art restoration with the Sistine Chapel, which we think was necessary to express. But if you were to know the man, Frank Mason, then you know that he spent the latter 50 years of his life very active, proactive about art restoration, helping form the Art Watch International with James Beck. if you want to learn more about the Sistine Chapel, I strongly suggest that you pick up the book, which is Art Restoration, the Culture, the Business, and the Scandal.
Yeah, we don't make any money off selling that book. It's just, it inspired us, and it just opened our eyes to a lot of things. And also Tom Wolfe's book, The Painted Word.
The Painted Word, yeah.
Also, it's a little essay, but it really is kind of a chuckle, and it really opens your eyes about how we transitioned from sort of what was deemed the French atelier school of painting to sort of, as Frank used to say, the school of drop it, throw it, fling it. So, and also about that, yeah, so we feel that we stayed true to Frank. So that's why the beginning of our film was Frank the painter, and then we sort of dovetailed into Frank the activist, and then we sort of closed with artist with hat in hand going about an artist's job. So he concluded his life being what he wanted to be most of all, or was destined to be, a painter. And a painter finds the gigs and he paints. And at one point, cause I was learning all about this, interviewing him, and I noticed that I said to him at one point, I said, "Oh, Frank, I'm so determined. I want to do a protest with you. When can we arrange another protest?" He goes, "Oh, I'm getting tired of protesting all the time. I just want to paint. I just want to paint."
And that's another thing that he said when, people get so disgruntled. And that's another thing, I feel horrible showing you people this film, because you're going to go into museums now and you're not going to think everything's perfect.
Yeah.
And you're going to start sticking your nose into the paintings and see when there's glazes taken off. But I mean, I think it's something that should be looked for, and if you want to sign up, you should definitely take some action and talk about it to friends at dinner parties, because very few people know that the subject exists. But what Frank had said, even though they're cleaning off paintings all the time, he said, "That's all right, just we got to paint a new one, paint a new masterpiece." And that's why we closed with Frank and his portrait in Venice, because even though the Sistine Chapel was ultimately cleaned, Frank himself was still painting and still continuing on in the vein of the Renaissance art.
And even Alex Elliott also said, still go see the Sistine Chapel. Still go see it.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of Michelangelo left.
To piggyback off of her comment and yours, what I appreciated about this movie, aside from the art, which we all appreciate the art and we get certain things out of it, it makes us feel the way we feel. We have the perspective of life as we see the art, is just the basic regard and respect and the courtesy that this gentleman just exuded, not only for others, but really for himself. And to see him and have never met him, I hold him in the highest regard. And all that in the context of where society is today, with such countless examples daily of such disrespect and disregard, sense of entitlement. So that, I think everybody should see this type of movie. Which the question is, how can we get a copy, or where can we take our friends to go see it too?
Sure. Well, we've been invited to LA in November 6th, actually, to do a private screening for a realist society. I plan on doing something in a tandem maybe with the museum down here. We can't really do any commercial distribution or sell tickets outside of the festival circuit, because that will just turn away all our distributors and people who want to pick up the film. But yeah, just keep keying into the website.